Since we're less clear on the effective introduction techniques, and those seem to be the biggest mystery, we're going to start with that instead of starting with what I had originally planned. So if you'll go back to your Google Classroom page, beginning to plan your introduction, which is at the top of the page. And on this document, you'll find some information that provides you with techniques on how to introduce a project. This is great for this particular project that we're working on, but it's also great for those of you who are going on to higher ed, if you're going to go to college. I would bookmark these sites to be able to come back and see these. The first one, 5 Great Hooks, is for argumentative or persuasive essays, and that's precisely what we're doing. And that is from a great, easy-to-use source, Scholastic Scope. It's written for the high school level, so it's easy for you to use, so you can check that out. The other source, the second source, again, I'm having a little bit of a delay here. 8 introduction techniques. This is posted by a writer, and it's frankly, it's not earth-shattering. It's typical or traditional introduction techniques that we've talked about for a long time. Things like telling a story, things like describing something or using a quotation, using a surprising fact, or going for the common ground. But I want you to sort through those to decide what's relevant for your project in particular. The third one, lead-ins that hook your audience. And there's, again, more information, and this is written by Lee Hobbs, who has a PhD in English and Literature and Language and Writing, so somebody that we can pay attention to and listen to. You're going to see a video later where the lady who's doing the narration talks about 4 introduction techniques. There's a lot more than 4. Her audience maybe was one that 4 was enough for them to deal with, but I wanted you to have the gamut of several and give you some examples of that. So those are introduction techniques for you to look for. By Wednesday, today's Monday, by Wednesday I'd like you to have not 3 completely written, but 3 ideas for how you might structure your introduction. Maybe I'll use this story. If I've got students doing research on gene therapy, and I showed them an example of a story about a Russian wrestler who was affected by gene therapy and how that had an impact on him. Now, I could save that information for later in my paper to talk about why gene therapy is not good for the body, but I could also use it as an interesting story to get somebody involved in why they should care. So I want you to make some decisions about what might you use to introduce your story, your paper. Below, at the bottom of this document, underneath the links to the introductory techniques, are some examples of how I'd like you to present your information on Wednesday. If you say from the Scope Writing Lab, I'm going to use a rhetorical question, tell me what question you might start with, and make sure that it's not a yes or no, and make sure that it's interesting and that it is controversial or there's a real question about it. If from the 8 introductory techniques you're going to use tell a story, what kind of a story might you tell? Just to describe it. Lead-ins, description with emotional appeal. You can either describe how you might do that or actually begin writing to set the scene. One of the ways that you can, one of the techniques that you can use is to create a fictionalized approach. I could tell a story that someday might happen, The important thing there is to make sure that when you do that, you indicate that it is fictional in some way. An easy way to do that is to put it in the future by several years. You know, it's March 5th, 2019, and so is on their way to school. Clearly it's fictional because it's set in the future. So if you're thinking about doing something like that, let me know, because we don't want to present information as factual when in fact it's not. So for Wednesday, I'm going to ask you to have 3 separate plans for how you might introduce your writing. And I want you to use the page that I just showed you and one other source just to cement all of this in terms of what is it that we're going to be doing with our introduction and what's it for. It's a short video that has a few questions embedded in it, and you can get to it through the Developing Your Introduction assignment where we started today. But instead of this link, you're going to click on where it says Educated, and that's going to open a video that I did not create, I borrowed, but I created the questions. And you'll put in your name. And you can use your school email. And click Go to Lesson. Okay. Oh boy. Hopefully it'll be easier for you guys because you're students. And then it looks like this.
Hello everyone, this is Michelle, and welcome to this brief review of the introductory paragraph. Your introduction is your first chance to establish credibility.
So Michelle, whoever Michelle is, leads you through this talk on the introductory paragraph. And each spot here where you see an orange line, that's a question that I ask you. The whole thing's 4 minutes long, and I'll be able to look at your responses once you're completed watching that video. Watch that video, review that documentation that I shared with you, and come on Wednesday with 3 methods of introduction techniques that you could use for your project.
By the method, like, what do you mean?
Those methods are the ones you're going to discover on those 3 resources that I shared with you: the scope, the 8 techniques, and the lead-ins. What's that?
So, like, we're just saying what methods we would use.
Yeah, and I've given you an example on that document of how I want you to present it. So if you're going to use an anecdotal story, I want you to at least describe to me what kind of a story you might tell. So it's, when I read your submission, I'll also know what topic you're doing, because you're going to give me enough information that I'll be able to say, oh, I see. He's going to tell me a story about a young child who experienced this, and that's going to have an emotional appeal on me. Something along those lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I
So in the meantime, so for Wednesday, just to review, video, those 3 introduction techniques based on something from each of those 3 resources that I shared with you. And if you need to continue to gather resources for your research, that's what you have between the rest of today and tomorrow. Okay? Questions?